Something I hear pretty often, attempting to sound like, well, we're just trying to be reasonable, is this idea of compromise. Why can't we have cows and elk? Why can't we have wildlife and ranching? Well, first of all, that's what a national park is. A place where wildlife can continue to exist because everything else is gone. We've taken their habitat from them. The original legislation itself says in order to preserve a portion of the diminishing coastline, and whether you are trying to save it from urban development or from agriculture, both of them take away habitat. This is what attempting to have both looks like, because the rest of their habitat is gone. And now you want to have cows even in a place that is the last refuge for these animals. Jared Huffman, at one of his town hall meetings, dismissed a concerned citizen's question by saying, well, the ranching is only 30% of the seashore. 30% of the tiny little place that we set aside for natural habitat and for native animals. What percent of Marin County is agriculture? What percent of Marin County is ranching? What percent of Sonoma? What percent of California? What percent of the United States? If we can't even give them that tiny little peninsula, if we're claiming that we need the ranches in that little strip of land, as well as all the ranches that are surrounding that strip of land, and all the ranches surrounding that strip of land, then what is left for anything else? That's why we need national parks. People talk about relocating the elk. Relocate them where? Back to where they were hunted to the brink of extinction? They were reintroduced to a national seashore for a reason. That's just my big picture take on this fake altruistic idea of, hey, what about sharing? Other ways to look at this idea of why can't we have both? Well, there are attempts to have both. There are attempts to reach compromise, and they are rejected, not by the citizens, but by the ranchers and the Park Service. For example, there are proposed plans from A to F, and the one that is being chosen by the Park Service blatantly gives the ranchers everything while taking away from the wildlife. There wasn't a choice. They didn't say, well, here's this one in the middle ground that gives a little something to both sides of the argument. No, they went all the way to the other extreme. Your idea of compromise is to shoot native wildlife while expanding ranching, giving leases that allow more heads of cattle, more heads of other kinds of livestock, more types of crops to be grown, all things that have already been documented to impair local wildlife. Second of all, think about why we're having this conversation in the first place. The ranchers are so unwilling to share that they want to kill elk for eating grass in a national seashore. That tells you everything you need to know right there. And you want to talk about, oh, they got to earn a living and this and that. If your business is so unsustainable that you can't tolerate a handful of native wild animals eating grass before you're going to claim that you're going to collapse economically, well, you're in the wrong business. But that doesn't stop them from simultaneously claiming that it is sustainable. Sustainable. It's so sustainable that we can't tolerate a few herbivores eating grass. Next, people act like it's the environmentalists or the wildlife enthusiasts who are like, oh, we're just gonna be unreasonable and we want ranching gone, period. Tell me what part of this is unreasonable. Hey, we're going to give you millions of dollars for your land, and then because you don't want to leave, we're going to go ahead and give you these leases, and you get to stay here for a fraction of the cost of what you should be staying here for, so that you can move on to other endeavors over a period of time. Wow, how unreasonable. Are we going to talk about efforts by the ranchers to further privatize the seashore, making it even less of a national park than it already is? Basically taking something that belongs to the people away from the people. By the way, you're still funding all of it. If you look into past articles in the Point Reyes Light or in the Marin Independent Journal, you have ranchers writing in and actually complaining about people being in the seashore. You look in the FOIA documents and you see efforts being made by the ranchers saying, hey, we want these recreation trails closed. We don't want these people here. Is that compromise? You're fooling yourself if you think that the pro-ranching side is interested in some sort of middle ground. They've gotten their way, and they've gotten their way for decades, and they don't expect to have to give an inch. And as we're seeing, the Park Service doesn't plan on giving them anything less than exactly what they want. You think things are going to improve from here? You give a dictator another 20 years in power, and you think things are going to improve? Are we going to talk about existing lease violations that go unpunished? Are we going to talk about recommendations that allow ranching to continue while being better for the wildlife that go completely ignored? How about wildlife-friendly fencing for starters? How about covering the feeding troughs so as to reduce their impact on the behavior of native birds? How about ignoring the recommendation to push back the spring harvest of their silage fields so as to reduce the number of native animals that get chopped up in their mower blades because they're in there in the first place because it's spring and the babies are hiding? Let's talk a little bit more about this idea that concerned citizens who have seen enough of all the pollution and land degradation going on out there are being portrayed as picking on these poor, honest people. Well, let's look at the water quality for starters, because at the end of the trail, you run into this bump where it's not actually illegal because they're being granted waivers that allow them to pollute to their heart's content. Well, let me ask you this. How does that make them good, hardworking people that we should be respecting when they're going to abuse things to the extent that they can get away with? Where is this desire for compromise that you're talking about?